I believe that St. John's is the essential institution in higher education. Universities have veered towards research and towards a kind of professionalization and a kind of vocational perspective on education that I think is appropriate for many students, but should not be the sole model that is available in higher education. And St. John's preserves the alternative in a kind of purest, most Platonic form. Learning for the sake of learning. Reading books and letting those books pose questions to you, whether they're questions about philosophy, the natural world, mathematics, language, whatever those questions, letting those books pose questions to you and then compelling you to engage in a conversation about those questions, even if there's no final answer. To me, that's a kind of pure form of intellectual inquiry. I mean, that's the real life of the mind. What St. John's says seems to me so critical, and I think our current time proves that. There had been kind of, I think, some fantasies that some people held, that traditional models of education were becoming a little shop-worn, that the future was going to be online or media-driven or technologized, and that, we would slowly evolve towards that and leave behind the highly personalized, intimate, labor-intensive education like we have here at St. John's. I am sure that as we move forward, more and more people are going to look to places like St. John's and say that time-tested form of education is the best way to shape minds, to build character, to prepare young people for a complex world. That's what I often say. At St. John's, the last thing we're worried about is preparing you for your entry-level job. We want to prepare you for the rest of your life. It can be difficult to understand if the template that somebody is holding is that you go to high school and then you enter college as some sort of, job training program that's preparing you for something very specific. The problem with that model is the world isn't cooperating with it any longer. The kind of education that one gets in a typical major at any college or university doesn't match up with the kinds of jobs that one encounters when leaving college. Unless it's something very specific and technical, like nursing, right? Studying econ is not going to make you a better banker, right? Studying, psychology, it might prepare you for a graduate program in psychology, but what is it really preparing you for? I think the age of the college major is over. It used to be held that the human brain stopped developing around the age of 13 or 14. So we developed, our mental muscle got as strong as it would be, and the rest of education was just filling in the gaps of one's knowledge or learning things about the world that you could apply your intellectual capacities to. What neuropsychologists, I think that's the right word, show now is that the brain is still developing until somebody's about 23 years old. Instead of bringing a fully developed intellect that now needs to be directed towards a particular skill or profession, we need the college years to be an intensive intellectual workout session, right? We're building our ratiocinative powers. We're building the intellect that we're going to have for the rest of our life, and especially doing so in the years that one's in college, traditionally in college. So an education like St. John's, which is the most rigorous education in the US, the toughest undergraduate program to get through, the most comprehensive form of education, looking, with equal measure at all questions, natural, philosophical, scientific, mathematical, looking at all these things and seeing how they interrelate. It's not about mastering the Iliad or Newton. It's about going through the process of trying to sort out what these great thinkers have thought, why they've thought it, what questions they've raised, and what our response to that is. It's about building the intellect. The National Education Association came out a few years ago with this massive study trying to kind of distill what it was that young people needed to learn to be successful in the rapidly evolving, fluid world that we live in. And they came up with conveniently what they call the 4 C's. They said, education isn't about subject matter, it's about developing a set of skills, and those skills are the 4 C's: critical thinking, collaboration, creativity, and communication. And if you equip somebody with those things, they can go on and have a successful life in the world today. I've been here 3 years now, and from the minute I got here, I was kind of hectoring everybody, including our board, saying the high tuition model has got to go. The way of thinking about college as being funded primarily by tuition that's not sustainable. It's not sustainable for the colleges or the families. What can we do to change that? And as I'm sure you know, we announced, it's going on 2 years now, that we lowered our tuition by 33%. And we were doing this, every consultant I talked to said, don't do that. Like, you need a super high tuition because that's what all the prestigious schools have. But if you don't have a super high tuition, you're going to look like you're not worth something. Even though nobody pays that tuition and everything's highly discounted, it's sort of like saying, if you drop the price on, I don't know, a necklace or something, people are going to think it has less worth. And I just didn't believe that. I mean, I think maybe at some point that held true, but I said, I think the anxiety and stress that families feel over affording college education outweighs the superficiality of thinking about prestige pricing. I bet you families will respond positively to a price point that's more affordable. So we lowered our price from, at that point, $52,000 down to $33,000. We essentially rolled our tuition back a decade to what it was before, a decade of price increases. We've held that tuition since. So over the past couple of years, we've held at that tuition. I mean, I'm not surprised by this. Some people are. We have had a tremendous response to that. We're going into this current enrollment season into the fall with a record number of deposits. Last year in Annapolis, we reached, the maximum possible student population we could serve. We had to cap things up. We have no more room, and we are continuing. And the class we're recruiting this year is as large as the class last year. In Santa Fe, over the past 2 years, the number of deposits have increased by, I think, 80%. And one of the things that's helping us at this particular crisis moment is that the students are still coming. They're still coming in great number. Not every school is in this position now. It's a challenging enrollment cycle. Now, it's the end of May. School starts in August. The world is strange. It's zigging and zagging in all different directions. We do expect that there could be attrition, and many students may choose to defer for a year. There's all sorts of things. But if we were just looking at this year relative to where we have been and other schools have been over the past few cycles at this time in May, there's been a tremendous amount of growth. And that also to me speaks to the desire for a liberal education. So I think if you get the word out there, you put yourself in front of young people who have the chance, which I didn't have, the chance to evaluate whether or not a place like St. John's is the best kind of education for them. A good number of them say it is, and they want to come. The same day we announced a 33% tuition reduction, we announced a $300 million campaign. We only have, between 800 and 900 students across 2 campuses total. A $300 million campaign is, for most institutions of our size, unimaginable. At this point, we've raised about $250 million. of 300 million, and that's only a couple of years into a 5-year campaign. So again, that response to me is an indication of the enthusiasm and support that our alumni feel, the friends of the college feel, and many people have nothing to do with the college. I've had people, donors come forward who have never had any direct connection with the college whatsoever, but knew about the kind of education that we offer and make $3 million gifts towards the campaign because they're like, this is the school that needs to survive. I love that we're right here in the middle of Annapolis. I mean, I just think it's a kind of dream location to me because the character of the school, which is a school that lives in the present but is so rooted in what's come before. I mean, that's Annapolis too, right? Annapolis is this place that has this deep sense of its history, traditions, but isn't a museum, right? It's not like Colonial Williamsburg where it's interesting and but artificial. I mean, this is a town that lives and breathes its own history. Similarly, I think St. John's is a school that lives and breathes its history and values that and teaches a kind of, gives its students a kind of ahistorical perspective, that you live in history, but that the mind has to range all over the place. So I think it's a great, I would say, there's a great personality match between St. John's and Annapolis. And it's also great because, one of the great pleasures for us, my wife, Christine, and I, our kids and I, in coming here is that it's also a very intimate and closely bound community. So in the same way that St. John's is a small college and you kind of get to know everybody, this is a small town. And you immediately start to see who's connected and how things get done around here, how the cultural organizations are supported, how the civic organizations are supported, and how St. John's is interwoven into that. My predecessor, Chris Nelson, was fantastic at participating in the life of Annapolis. He was on many, many boards and very involved in town. I'm getting there. I have 2 younger-ish kids, so I'm a little bit slower being college president and being integrated, but we plan on being here a long time, so we are getting to know the town better. But I think it's a place with so much personality. It's so quirky and interesting and distinctive, and I think Annapolis adds that to St. John's, and St. John's adds its distinctive quirkiness to Annapolis.